I never expected that a simple knock on the door would change everything. I had just finished a long day of work, but when my meeting was suddenly canceled, I found myself with too much time in a hotel room alone. That was when he showed up, a housekeeper with dark, knowing eyes and a presence that made the room feel smaller. And when I opened the door, I never imagined I'd be standing there, caught between deciding whether to let him in or to let him change everything. I froze for a moment, my hand still on the door handle, unsure whether to stay or leave. The hotel room was lavish, one of those places where everything gleamed with that sterile, perfect quality, and I had been lost in the luxury of it all. But now, standing before me was a man, probably in his late 30s, his uniform faded but clean, his hair tousled in a way that made him look more genuine than any hotel staff I had ever encountered. His name tag read Dave, but there was something about his eyes, something warmer, deeper, that made me hesitate. "Housekeeping," he said in a soft, deep voice, as if apologizing for the interruption. "I can clean up if you're done here." The air between us hung heavy for a moment. I wasn't sure why I hesitated, why I didn't just tell him to come in and do his job like I would with any other staff. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, not like he was just doing a job, but like he belonged here in a way that felt different. I nodded, stepping aside. "Sure," I said, trying to brush off the strange feeling in my chest. "Thanks." He moved past me into the room, pushing a cart laden with cleaning supplies. I watched him as he began his work, organizing the desk, fluffing the pillows, cleaning the glass. His movements were calm, fluid, and somehow intimate in a way that made me watch a little too closely. I wasn't sure why I stayed at first, but after a while, I began to feel a quiet pull toward him. His presence was different from what I had expected. Maybe it was the way he worked, maybe it was the way he carried himself, how every movement seemed to fill the room without him trying to. I stood there, unsure of what to do at the time. It wasn't like I had any plans. My meeting was canceled and I was now left with hours to kill. So I started to undo my blazer, my mind distracted by his every movement. I wasn't planning on it, but before I knew it, I had slipped out of the suit jacket and was loosening my tie. The cool air from the window brushed against my skin. But then I realized he was still there. The quiet sound of him working in the background suddenly felt more present than it should have. I caught myself, frozen, and looked over. He had paused for a brief moment, his eyes meeting mine just as I pulled off my shirt. The space between us grew smaller, more charged, as if a shift had happened without either of us saying a word. His gaze didn't drop away. It stayed. And in that fraction of a second, something shifted. He didn't look away, but neither did I. His breath caught, or maybe it was mine. I wasn't sure what to do. 100 thoughts raced through my head. I should have stepped away, told him to get on with his work. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped toward him just slightly, and the moment grew thicker. I started to say, but the words faltered, lost in the thick tension that had built between us. He didn't speak. Instead, his hands paused for a fraction of a second before he casually adjusted a folded towel on the counter. His fingers brushed the edge, his hands staying there a moment longer than necessary. I looked down at the floor, trying to gather myself, but his presence filled the space, the weight of the moment, the heat that was building between us. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just let it hang there, unspoken. And in that silence, I suddenly realized I didn't want him to leave. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy like the air in a room before a storm. I still hadn't moved, and neither had he. Dave's gaze was steady on me, yet there was a softness there, a quiet uncertainty that made my chest tighten. The door was still open, and I realized that neither of us had acknowledged the fact that I was standing there, half undressed. He cleared his throat. "I can come back later if—" "No," I said quickly, my voice coming out a little more desperate than I intended. "No, it's fine. You can finish." I wasn't sure what made me say it. I wasn't trying to send him a signal or invite anything. I just felt like I didn't want to be alone in that moment anymore. The quiet in the room, the tension that was suddenly so palpable it had started to feel like it was suffocating me. For a moment, Dave stood still, like he was waiting for something, some sign, some permission. His fingers brushed the cart handle absently, and I noticed the small shift in his posture. There was a certain reluctance in the way he held himself back, a hesitation that made me wonder if he felt the same pull I did. But neither of us moved. "Do you want to stay?" I asked finally, unsure where the question was even coming from. The thought of him leaving felt wrong, like it would be the most unnatural thing. He blinked, surprised, as if he hadn't expected me to ask, but then a slow smile crept across his face. It was the kind of smile that lit up his whole face, the kind that made me feel like I wasn't the only one with a strange feeling running through him. Yeah. I'd like that, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. His gaze softened, and for the first time I noticed how his hands weren't shaking, how steady he was, how he wasn't running away from this either. I exhaled, relieved. All right, I said. Come in. He stepped inside the room, closing the door gently behind him. I stood there, unsure of what to do next, feeling an unfamiliar flutter in my stomach. It wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It was anticipation. Dave set the cleaning cart aside, his eyes never leaving me. Slowly, carefully, he walked toward me. His presence seemed to fill the space, drawing me in, and before I even realized what was happening, I was moving closer to him. This time, there was no hesitation. This time, it was different. We stood facing each other, barely inches apart, and I could feel the heat between us, like it was burning through the space that had once felt so large and empty. He was close now, so close I could feel his breath on my face, could smell the faint scent of soap on his skin. I didn't want to speak anymore. I didn't want to break this. So I kissed him again. Hey, thanks for watching until this point. Please leave a comment if you're enjoying the video. It really helps us grow the channel and reach more people. And hey, thank you very much. Let's get back to story. This time it was slower, deeper, the kind of kiss that said everything without needing words. His lips were soft, his hands warm as they moved up to cup my face. I let out a soft sigh as I leaned into him, feeling the tension from earlier dissolve completely. His hand slid down to the small of my back, pulling me even closer, and my chest tightened as I felt the warmth of his body against mine. The kiss deepened, more desperate now, as if neither of us wanted to wait any longer, as if we both knew that what we were doing, what we were feeling, couldn't be ignored anymore. His fingers slid down to the edge of my pants, brushing against the fabric, and a shiver ran through me. I pulled away just slightly, my breath ragged as I looked at him, seeing the same need mirrored in his eyes. Are you sure? He whispered, his voice barely audible, but I could hear the uncertainty there, the soft question in his tone. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper, but clear. Yes, I'm sure. Without another word, he leaned in again, his lips meeting mine in a hungry kiss, and I felt everything else, the hotel, the work, the world outside, fade into nothing. The only thing that existed in that moment was him and me, our bodies pressed together, our hearts beating in time with each other. And as we stumbled toward the bed, the last piece of restraint between us finally broke. The bed was soft beneath us as we collapsed into it, still tangled in each other's embrace. Everything felt too fast, too intense, but also right. Every breath we took seemed to fill the space between us with a charged energy that neither of us had known existed until that moment. Dave's hands were on me again, exploring, tracing lines across my chest with slow precision, like he was trying to memorize every inch of me. I could feel his warmth through the thin fabric of my shirt, and I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to feel his skin against mine. Without thinking, I pushed myself up, tugging my shirt off and tossing it aside. Dave's eyes followed every movement, a slight smirk on his lips. His gaze was intense, but there was a tenderness there, a quiet understanding that made everything feel safe. You're not like anyone I've met before, I murmured, feeling my heart race as I reached for his shirt. My fingers brushed against his chest, feeling the hard muscle beneath the fabric. I wasn't sure where my words were coming from, but I knew they were true. There was something different about him, something more real than anything I'd felt before. Dave didn't respond with words. Instead, his hands moved to the hem of his shirt, pulling it off and revealing his body. I couldn't help the way my eyes traced every line, every muscle. He wasn't just physically strong, he had a quiet strength in his presence, a power that drew me in and held me there. His lips found mine again, the kiss deepening immediately, more urgent now. His hands roamed down my back, his fingers brushing over the smooth skin, and I couldn't suppress a shiver. His touch felt like a revelation, soft but firm, gentle but insistent. I kissed him back, meeting the heat of his mouth with equal hunger, letting myself get lost in it. For a moment, I forgot everything, the hotel, the fact that I was supposed to be on a work trip, the reasons I shouldn't be in this situation. All I could focus on was the feeling of him, the way his body moved against mine, the way he responded to me like we'd known each other for much longer than we actually had. Dave's hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, our bodies pressed together in a way that made my mind spin. My hands moved on their own accord, finding the buckle of his belt, quickly unfastening it. The movement was instinctive, like this was the only thing that mattered in the world. I could feel his breath quicken, could hear the soft sounds escaping his mouth as he worked to undress me too. We didn't stop. It was like we couldn't. The tension, the attraction, the curiosity we'd both been suppressing for years, it all came crashing to the surface in a tangled mess of skin, sweat, and whispered words. It felt too fast, too much, but at the same time I didn't want it to stop. There was something about this moment that was too real to deny, something that felt like it had been waiting to happen for a long time. He moved above me, his body pressed against mine in a way that made my breath catch. I reached up, pulling him closer, needing to feel more of him, to know more of him. The way his hands gripped my shoulders, the way he kissed me with such quiet intensity, everything about him felt right. But even in the heat of the moment, a part of me was still unsure, still uncertain about what came next. But as his lips found my neck, as his hands traced the lines of my body, that uncertainty melted away. There was no more thinking. There was only him. Only us. And in that moment, with him on top of me, his body moving with mine, I realized this wasn't just about the heat or the passion. It was about the connection, the bond we had formed, despite all the odds, despite the unspoken tension that had been building for so long. I didn't have time to think anymore. I just felt. And in that feeling, I knew that what we had wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was something real. Something that couldn't be undone. When we finally stopped, it wasn't because we wanted to. It wasn't because we'd reached the end of whatever we were doing, it was because we both needed a moment to catch our breath. Our bodies were still tangled together, sweat slicked and warm, and I could hear the sound of our heartbeats racing but slowly slowing down. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The room was quiet except for the sound of the air conditioning humming softly in the corner. I closed my eyes, still feeling the pulse of his body against mine, the heat of his hands still lingering on my skin. It was surreal, in a way, like it wasn't real, like this wasn't really happening. But I could feel him, feel his chest rising and falling against mine, his breath warm on my neck. It was real. He was real. And somehow, in a way I couldn't explain, it felt like this had always been meant to happen. Dave shifted, adjusting his position so that he was lying beside me now, his arms still draped over my waist. His hand rested on my hip, his fingers tracing slow, lazy patterns against my skin. It was gentle, comforting, like he wasn't rushing, like he was content to just be there. I turned my head slightly, meeting his eyes. There was no awkwardness, no uncertainty, just a quiet understanding that hung between us. A mutual acknowledgement of what we had shared, what we'd done, and what we hadn't yet fully processed. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, unsure if the words were even necessary. He chuckled softly, his thumb brushing my side. "You don't have to say anything." I smiled, turning toward him, leaning my forehead against his. His hand moved to the back of my neck and he pulled me into a slow kiss. It wasn't rushed or demanding, it was calm, tender, the kind of kiss that left you feeling grounded, like everything that had happened between us had led to this quiet moment of connection. "I didn't think I'd end up here," I admitted quietly, still trying to process everything that had just unfolded. "Me neither," Dave said, his voice low and full of warmth. "But it's not a bad thing, is it?" I shook my head, a small laugh escaping my lips. "No, not at all." We lay there in silence, letting the moment stretch out between us. There was no need to rush, no need to rush back into the chaos of the world outside. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could just breathe, like I could simply exist without all the usual pressures and expectations. Eventually, Dave sat up, stretching his arms above his head. I followed his movement, sitting beside him, my body still buzzing from what we'd shared. "You sure you don't want me to leave?" he asked, glancing over at me with a playful but cautious look. I raised an eyebrow. "Why would I want you to leave?" He shrugged, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Just making sure." I leaned forward, kissing him again, this time softer. "Stay. We're not done yet." His eyes softened and he nodded, pulling me close again, wrapping his arms around me like he didn't want to let go. And I didn't want him to either. The rest of the day passed in a haze of quiet comfort. We didn't speak much, just existing in the space we had created between us. It felt surreal, like we were in some suspended bubble where time didn't matter and the outside world couldn't touch us. Every now and then, our eyes would meet and we'd share a small smile, the kind of smile that didn't need words to communicate everything we felt. I had planned to spend the rest of the afternoon working, but it didn't feel important anymore. The files, the emails, the reports, they all felt trivial compared to the warmth that had settled between us. There was no hurry, no rush. We were both content to simply stay where we were. I noticed the way Dave moved around the room. The way he cleaned with such quiet focus. There was something soothing about watching him, his steady hands as he made sure everything was in place, the quiet concentration in his eyes. And as much as I had tried to pretend that I was used to this kind of luxury, this kind of life, I realized that being around him made everything feel real. Honest. Like I didn't have to hide behind the trappings of wealth and success. After a while, he stopped what he was doing and sat down beside me on the bed. He didn't say anything, but his presence was enough. It was like we were both basking in the aftermath of what had happened, savoring the new connection that had been formed between us. You know, he said after a while, breaking the silence, I don't usually do this. I looked at him, surprised. What do you mean? Get close to guests like this, he clarified, his voice low, almost shy. I've worked here for a long time, and usually I keep to myself. But with you. I tilted my head, a soft smile tugging at my lips. What about me? He hesitated, looking down at his hands before meeting my eyes. You're different, he said simply. My chest tightened and I couldn't help but feel the same way. There was something about him that made everything else feel unimportant. In this moment, in this space, I wasn't the businessman trying to keep up appearances. I wasn't the rich guest staying in a luxury hotel. I was just me with him in a way that felt more real than anything else I had experienced in a long time. I think I'm different too, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled softly, leaning in closer. I like that. For a moment, we just sat there, silently sharing a space that felt comfortable, like we had found something rare in each other, something worth holding on to. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to. And then, as if by mutual understanding, we kissed again, slower this time, deeper, as if we were both trying to memorize the feeling. I could taste the salt on his lips, could feel the warmth of his breath as it mingled with mine. His hands moved up to my neck, pulling me closer, and I responded in kind, my hands finding their way to his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath my fingers. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. There was no urgency, no desire to get to the end. There was just us, right here, in this moment, figuring out what this was, and somehow not needing any answers. The night fell slowly around us, the city lights twinkling softly outside the window, casting shadows on the walls. I lay next to Dave, our bodies pressed together, both of us still tangled in the comfort of each other's warmth. The silence between us felt easy, like it had always been this way, as though we had always existed in the same space, even if we hadn't known it before. Dave's hand rested lightly on my chest, and I could feel the steady rhythm of his breath. Every time he shifted, I followed, unwilling to break the connection. I wasn't thinking about the hotel, the meeting that had been canceled, or the reality I'd left behind. All I could think about was this moment, this quiet place between us where nothing else mattered. I looked at him, his eyes half closed in contentment. He didn't speak, but I could see the way he was looking at me, like I was someone he hadn't expected, someone he was learning about, just like I was learning about him. You okay? He asked softly, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. I smiled, the warmth of the moment filling me. Yeah, more than okay. He chuckled, lifting his head to meet my gaze. You don't seem like the type to stay in a hotel and just relax. I shrugged, a smile still lingering on my lips. I'm not. But I don't think I've ever needed to relax more than I do right now. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my forehead in a slow, tender kiss. I'm glad I could help you with that, he whispered. I closed my eyes, letting the moment sink in. I didn't know what was next for us. This connection, this unexpected bond that had formed in the course of a few hours. But I knew that something had changed, something important. And it wasn't just about the intimacy we had shared. It was about the way we had opened up to each other, the way we had let ourselves be vulnerable, let ourselves just be in that room together. I think I've been running from things for too long, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. From myself. From the kind of life I really want. Maybe it's time to stop running. Dave's fingers tightened gently around mine. You don't have to run anymore. I looked at him, my heart racing for a moment. What if I want to stay here? Not just for tonight, but longer? What if I don't want to go back to the life I've built? What if I want something more real? He smiled, the kind of smile that made my chest tighten. Then stay, if that's what you want. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if this was just a fleeting moment or something that could grow into something lasting. But right now, with him beside me, with everything that had just happened, I didn't feel alone anymore. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. As the night stretched on and the hotel around us seemed to fade into the background, I closed my eyes, content. This was the beginning of something, and no matter where it led, I knew that I didn't want to face it without Dave by my side. We didn't speak anymore. Instead, we just held each other, the world outside no longer pressing in, no longer demanding anything from us. For the first time in a long time, everything felt still, and that stillness was enough.